Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. My name's William, this is Set a Course of Competition, and today I'm going to be driving the Mercedes AMG GT4 around Spa. I'm going to have a hot lap for you guys, and then go over the setup that I'm making for it, as well as some tweaks and adjustments and some of the reasons why I made those changes. So maybe you can get an idea of what I was going for, and also potentially tweak something if you don't like it exactly the way I had it, if it doesn't suit your style or whatever, or you're running it in very different conditions, something along those lines. But anyways, as always, guys, I want to say thank you so much for all the support. It really does mean a lot to me, and I hope you guys enjoy this setup and manage to wrangle this thing around the track and have a blast with it, as I have been for the last little bit. So without further ado, we'll get on into the hot lap, and then I'll be back to talk with you guys over the setup afterwards. Enjoy. Alright everyone, that was a hot lap around Spa in the Mercedes AMG GT4. You can see the time here is a 2:30.822. Looking at the timetable, that is a massive improvement over my first lap, which was on the aggressive preset. Not saying that's the fastest you could go on the aggressive preset, but nevertheless, a big pickup in time just from getting a little bit better balance out of the car and still more speed in it. You can see here about 2/10 off of my best for the third sector, and about 1/10 off of my best for sector 1. These are invalid laps, so you might think, well, I just cut the track, but really I just got too much wheel spin out of turn 1, and then didn't, for the third sector, I didn't commit to getting the car rotated on the entry to Blanchimont. I didn't quite lift the way I should have, and because of that I had to hesitate picking the throttle all the way back up on the exit, and then just a little bit too timid in the final chicane as well. So more time in it, and there's also just more time in it from driving it better and being a better driver for sure. But nevertheless, I'm really happy with that pickup over the aggressive preset and the improvement in the balance, at least in my opinion. So We can go ahead and take a look at the setup. As I said, I started with the aggressive preset there. This is what I wound up on. So for the tires, the main thing I'm going to talk about here is the hot pressures you should be looking for in this car. Because you're going to need to change your PSIs depending on what kind of driving you're going to do, whether it's hot lap mode, if you're in practice sessions, or if you're doing, a sprint race or some sort of endurance race. You're going to need to adjust your tire pressures, but the hot tire pressure you should be looking for from your tires on the front is 27 psi, no higher than that, in my opinion. That is about peak grip from the front. In fact, I would say run just a little bit less. That way you're not going over. You can go just a little bit over, but once you get about like 27 and a half, I think the grip definitely does start to fall away from the front a little bit. And then on the rear of the car, I aim for just a little bit under 27 psi for sure. I don't really want to get up that high. Just I want to keep the tire a little bit squishier and give it a better bite into the track in the acceleration zones, the traction zones, because that is really where I struggle in this car. Is just getting too much wheel spin in the traction zones, and it's kind of unavoidable in my opinion. There might be something to find later on, but this car just feels like it's got a lot of torque and not a lot of rear grip to go with it. Having said that, I was running my traction control on 1 and my ABS on 1, so I wanted to do that just because I really wanted to see the balance of the car, but in all honesty, I don't be dumb like me, just run more traction control if you're getting a whole lot of wheel spin, and use those tools available. You got a bunch of settings, and you're gonna probably want to adjust these anyways depending on the conditions you're running in and all that good stuff. So but I was running it on 1 and 1, and in a really good track conditions, it feels very drivable. It's just you do need to be a little patient with the throttle pedal and not just plant it like I was trying to do everywhere. For the brake pad compounds, I'm using 2 on the front and rear. This is just really honestly because it's what I like on the GT3s. I haven't tested the brake pad compounds fully on the GT4s, so definitely test those if you want to. I'm just stubborn and honestly have kind of forgotten about it whenever I do these. So using what I use on the GT3s there. For the suspension side of things, the wheel rate on the front on the lowest setting, I think this is definitely the way to go on this car. I tried all 3 settings. The softest felt by far the best and was also the fastest. So I don't see any reason really to increase the wheel rate on the front of the car. The other thing here is the anti-roll bars on 0 and 0 for front and rear. That is really for drivability of the car, especially through Eau Rouge. I know that's a corner everyone kind of struggles in. GT3s, I'm sure it'll be the same in GT4s. And in these cars, you do, at least I haven't been able to take it flat yet, but it is at least a lift. And with the anti-roll bar set this way, it was a very predictable, consistent feeling all the way through Eau Rouge, and then it felt honestly very drivable everywhere else on the track. So I went for that just because if you mess up Eau Rouge, that's a good way to lose like half a second on your lap time, and it still felt very drivable everywhere else on the track. So a good compromise, at least in my opinion, for the entire track to really make that change specifically for Eau Rouge. I didn't feel like I was giving anything up elsewhere. So the other thing is on the brake bias here, I almost always move it back. I moved it back about 2% from where it was on the aggressive preset. I will say I tried lower. I wouldn't go any lower than 53.4, but around 53.4 to 54% really gave me the same kind of feel on the brake. And I pretty much liked all of those settings. I just noticed I was in ABS less this on 53.4. So you can definitely run more if you need to. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just this is what works for me. But ultimately, if you want to try it back, I think I think you can honestly make anywhere between that 2%. It's not going to make or break the car either way. On the damper settings here, this is just kind of a happy medium. I got, once again, a little bit of a compromise. I did get some better results in some corners with much softer dampers on the front or on the rear, and vice versa, getting even stiffer um, on the front or the rear. And ultimately, this is just kind of like a happy medium. I'm not going to say it's necessarily the best settings, but by feel, it gave a consistent balance basically all the way around the track for me. So that's what I'm deciding to go with here. On the aero side of things, you're probably going to need to adjust these brake ducts depending on what kind of ambient temperature you're running in. Just keep that in mind, and I do think you need to keep the rear brake ducts a little bit more open than the front brake ducts. It seems to be the trend on the GT4 cars that the rear brakes hold more temperature than the front brakes, which makes sense. They just have less cooling in general. So, but you are definitely still working the rear brakes quite hard. So just keep that in mind and don't be overheating your brakes, but also don't let them get, stone cold. There's no point. So just try and keep a good balance where they've got a little bit of heat in them still, and also, by closing them up, you do kind of get a little bit less drag on the car, which is always nice. On the ride heights, I just went for a little bit of an increase to try and get a little bit more rotation out of the car in high-speed corners. And then from doing that, it doesn't seem as sensitive as the GT3 cars, but it definitely is pretty sensitive to ride height adjustments as far as the balance of the car. I did feel like I needed to increase the wing just a little bit by increasing that rear ride height. And then ultimately I found increasing it to 3 didn't really hurt the straight line speed too much. It is slightly noticeable, but ultimately the car once again felt more consistent and had a little bit more drivability for me. So that's what I went with. It's like I said, I wasn't giving up too much on the straights, and I got a little bit more drivability out of the car, and ultimately I think drivability is worth pretty much the most lap time, lap after lap after lap anyways. So you want something that you can actually put the laps together in, rather than something that you can put a golden lap in every once in a while. So that's the setup. One thing I will say about this car to note is, especially after Eau Rouge, when you're going down the Kimmel Straight, hold fifth almost until the car hits the rev limiter. It is worth a decent chunk of time. The car pulls pretty hard until about 150 miles an hour. You can see it's after the LEDs on your dash start flashing at you by a decent amount, and then go for the shift. And that is, like I said, it's worth a decent chunk of time, and the car pulls a lot harder in fifth at that in that rev range and everything like that than it does if you shift on those lights and go into sixth. So just keep that in mind and try and maximize all of that straight line speed that you can down that straightaway. But yeah, anyways guys, that is the setup. I hope you guys like it. Leave me any feedback. Like I said, just kind of getting into these cars, and don't really have a solid benchmark yet, and I think the times are kind of going to vary car to car anyways, a little bit more than the GT3s. So but yeah, let me know how you get on with it if you give it a try, and I appreciate any of the feedback. Thank you so much for all y'all's support, and until next time, I'll see you later. Bye bye.